Welcome to my Channel Deep Sleep Mission-DSM. As we begin, I would be delighted if you could share your location in the comments below. It's truly inspiring to witness how far this content travels and to connect with viewers from across the world. The groundskeeper at Arlington National Cemetery told me something last Tuesday that I can't stop thinking about. He said there's a grave that digs itself every single morning, without fail. And before you click away thinking this is just another ghost story, I have the photos to prove it. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me ask you this first. What would you do if you discovered that one specific grave, in one of America's most sacred places, was being disturbed every single night? And what if I told you that the cemetery staff knows about it, but they're forbidden from talking about it? Well, I found out why. And honestly, part of me wishes I hadn't. The story begins now. My name is Marcus Thompson. I'm a documentary filmmaker from Richmond, Virginia. And 3 weeks ago, I received an email that changed everything. It came from my old college roommate, Danny Reeves, who works as a night shift groundskeeper at Arlington National Cemetery. The subject line simply read, "You need to see this." Danny and I hadn't spoken in maybe 2 years, so getting an email from him out of the blue was already strange. But what he wrote made my blood run cold. "Marcus, I know you make those documentary films about unexplained stuff. I've got something for you. But you can't use my name. Ever. There's a grave here. Lot 31, Section 60. Every morning when I start my shift at 4 a.m., the earth is freshly disturbed, like someone dug it up and filled it back in. Every single morning. The brass doesn't want anyone talking about it. They just smooth it over before visitors arrive. Been happening for 3 months now. If you want to see it, come tomorrow night. I'll leave the service gate unlocked. Now, I've investigated plenty of supposedly paranormal locations. The old Waverly Hills Sanatorium in Louisville, Eastern State Penitentiary in Philadelphia, but Arlington? That's different. That's sacred ground. Over 400,000 service members rest there. You don't mess around with that. But Danny wasn't the type to make things up. He was boring, honestly. The kind of guy who organized his socks by thickness. If he said something strange was happening, then something strange was happening. So I went. The next night, Tuesday, October 15th. I drove the 2 hours from Richmond to Arlington. The service gate Danny mentioned was on the west side of the cemetery, barely visible from the main road. True to his word, it was unlocked. Walking through Arlington at night is unsettling. During the day, it's peaceful, orderly. The white headstones stand in perfect rows like soldiers at attention. But at night, those same headstones look like teeth. Thousands and thousands of teeth jutting up from the earth. I found Danny near Section 60. He was standing by his maintenance cart, nervously checking his watch. "You came," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yeah, I came. Now show me this grave." He led me deeper into Section 60. This is the area where many service members from Iraq and Afghanistan are buried. Recent conflicts, fresh grief. The headstones here aren't weathered yet. Some still have fresh flowers, photographs, letters from loved ones. We stopped at a grave near the back of the section. The headstone read, "S.G.T. James Morrison, 1985 to 2019. Operation Inherent Resolve until Valhalla." The earth in front of the headstone was wrong. While every other grave had grass that had grown over the years, this one looked like it had been dug up yesterday. The soil was dark, loose, fresh. "This is it," Danny whispered. "Lot 31, watch this." He took out his phone and showed me a video from that morning. The timestamp read 4:03 a.m. In the video, the grave looked exactly the same. Freshly disturbed earth. Then he swiped to another video, and another. all from different mornings, all showing the same thing. "How long has this been happening?" I asked. 3 months. Started on July 15th. Every single morning, it's like this. We fill it in, pack it down, lay new sod, doesn't matter. Next morning, freshly dug. Have you checked inside?" Danny's face went pale. "Are you insane? That's desecration. That's federal prison time. Besides," he paused, looking around nervously. "The one time someone suggested it, the brass shut it down immediately, said it was a maintenance issue and to just keep fixing it." I knelt down beside the grave, running my fingers through the loose soil. It was cold, colder than it should have been for October in Virginia, and there was something else, a smell. Not decay, but something metallic, like copper pennies. "Danny, has anyone seen who's doing this?" He shook his head. "We've had cameras on it for 2 months. Every morning, the footage from 3 a.m. to 4 a.m. is just static. It says it's an equipment malfunction, but how does the same malfunction happen every night at the exact same time?" I stood up, brushing the dirt off my hands. "I want to stay tonight, see what happens." Danny grabbed my arm. "Marcus, no, you don't understand. The few people who've tried to watch all night, they won't talk about what they saw. Johnson quit the next day. Ramirez transferred to day shift and won't even come to this section anymore. And Peterson." He trailed off. "What about Peterson?" "Peterson had a heart attack. He's 32 years old, marathon runner, and he had a heart attack. He survived, but he won't say what he saw, just keeps repeating, 'He's not ready, he's not ready.' I should have left then. Every instinct told me to leave. But I didn't. Because I'm an idiot who thought a good documentary was worth the risk. 'I'm staying,' I said." Danny stared at me for a long moment, then sighed. "Fine. But I'm not staying with you. And if anyone asks, you snuck in. I had nothing to do with this." He left me there, alone in Section 60, with only my camera and a flashlight. I set up my equipment about 20 feet from Lot 31, far enough to get a good shot but close enough to see details. Then I waited. The first 2 hours were uneventful. I sat there in the dark, listening to the distant sounds of traffic on the highway, watching the grave through my camera's viewfinder. Nothing happened. Then, at exactly 3 a.m., my camera died. Not the battery. I'd charged it fully and brought 3 spares. The camera just stopped working. The screen went black. No power light. Nothing. I grabbed my phone to use as a backup camera, but it was dead too. Completely bricked. Even my flashlight, which ran on regular batteries, went out. The only light came from the moon, casting long shadows across the headstones. And that's when I heard it. Scratching. It was coming from underground, from Lot 31. The sound was rhythmic, deliberate. Scratch, 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 like fingernails on wood. Then it stopped. The earth in front of the headstone began to move. It didn't erupt or explode. It just shifted, like something was pushing up from below. The soil rose about an inch, then settled. Rose again, settled, like breathing. Then I heard the voice. It was muffled, coming from deep underground, but I could make out words. "Not ready, not ready." The same words Peterson had repeated. But this voice, it wasn't panicked or afraid, it was frustrated, angry even. The earth continued to shift, and now I could see something breaking through. Not a hand or a body, but something else. Something that looked like tree roots? Black, twisted roots pushed through the soil, but they moved like fingers, reaching, grasping. They emerged about 6 inches, then retreated back into the earth, then emerged again, further this time. I wanted to run. Every cell in my body screamed at me to run. but I was frozen, watching these things that looked like roots but moved like tentacles, emerging and retreating. Emerging and retreating. Then the voice came again, clearer this time. "Why won't you let me rest?" The roots suddenly shot out of the ground, extending at least 3 feet into the air. They twisted together, forming something that almost looked like a hand with too many fingers. It grasped at the air, then slammed back down into the earth. The ground shook, not like an earthquake, but like something massive had just turned over in its sleep. Then, silence. The disturbed earth looked exactly as it had when Danny showed me. Freshly dug, loose soil, no sign of the roots or whatever they were. My equipment suddenly came back online. Camera, phone, flashlight, all working perfectly. The timestamp on my camera showed 4 a.m. Exactly 1 hour had passed, though it felt like minutes. I grabbed my gear and ran. I didn't stop running until I reached my car. But here's the thing. When I checked my camera's memory card, there was footage. Footage I didn't remember recording. The timestamp said 3 a.m. to 4 a.m. The hour my camera was supposedly dead. The footage showed lot 31. For 59 minutes, nothing happened. Just a static shot of the grave. Then, in the last 60 seconds, the earth began to move. But not like I remembered. In the footage, it looked like someone was digging from the inside, pushing soil up and out. And there was audio, a man's voice clear as day. I volunteered for this mission. They said it would be quick, in and out. But they lied. The thing they put inside me, it's not done. It needs more time. But my body can't hold it anymore. Every night it tries to leave, to find a new host. And every night I pull it back down. I'm so tired. But if I let go, if I stop fighting, God help us all. The footage ended. I drove home in a daze. I couldn't process what I'd seen, what I'd heard. When I got back to Richmond, I immediately started researching Sergeant James Morrison. What I found made everything worse. Sergeant James Morrison did die in 2019, but not in combat. The official record listed his cause of death as training accident. But that's where the official record got weird. Morrison wasn't infantry or special forces. He was a biochemist, assigned to USAMRIID, the United States Army Medical Research Institute of Infectious Diseases, the same facility that handles things like anthrax and Ebola. Why would a biochemist die in a training accident during Operation Inherent Resolve? I dug deeper, called in favors from journalist friends, searched through declassified documents, and I found something. A single reference in a heavily redacted report from 2019. Project Graft, Genetic Resistance and Adaptation Field Trial. Morrison's name appeared once, listed as voluntary test subject. The rest was blacked out, but there was a footnote. Easy to miss if you weren't looking for it. It referenced another document. A medical report from Walter Reed Medical Center. That report was supposed to be classified, but someone had made a mistake. It was accidentally included in a batch of files released under the Freedom of Information Act. The report described a patient, name redacted, who had been infected with something called Specimen 31. The symptoms were bizarre. Accelerated cell growth, increased bone density, enhanced muscle mass, but also rejection symptoms. The body was fighting against whatever Specimen 31 was. The report's conclusion was chilling. Subject's body is rejecting the specimen but cannot expel it. Recommend immediate isolation and observation. Under no circumstances should the subject be allowed to expire, as a specimen may seek new host upon death of current vessel. The report was dated July 12, 2019. Morrison died July 14, 2019. and the disturbances at his grave started exactly 3 months ago. July 15th, the 5-year anniversary of his death. I needed to go back. I needed to understand what was happening. So last night, October 22nd, I returned to Arlington. This time, I didn't go alone. I brought my friend Sarah Chen, an emergency room nurse from Georgetown University Hospital, if something went wrong. I wanted medical help nearby. We arrived at 2:30 a.m. The service gate was locked this time, but I'd made a copy of Danny's key during my first visit. We made our way to Section 60. Lot 31 looked the same, freshly disturbed earth. But this time, there was something else. A smell. Stronger than before, like copper and ozone. Like the air before a lightning strike. Sarah checked her watch. It's almost 3. We set up our equipment, but this time I brought something else. An electromagnetic field detector. If something weird was happening, maybe it would register. At 3 a.m., right on schedule, our equipment died. But the EMF detector, which ran on an analog battery, kept working. And it was going crazy. The needle was maxed out, picking up an electromagnetic field stronger than anything that should exist in a cemetery. The scratching started. But this time, it was different, more urgent, desperate. The earth didn't just shift, it erupted. Soil flew everywhere as something burst from the grave. Not roots this time, an arm, a human arm, but wrong. The skin was gray, stretched tight over muscles that were too large, too defined. The fingers were elongated, with too many joints. The arm grasped at the air, then slammed down on the ground. Using it as leverage, something began pulling itself up from the grave. Sarah grabbed my arm. We need to go. Now. But I couldn't move. I watched as a head emerged. It was Morrison, but not Morrison. The face was his. I recognized it from the photos I'd found, but the skull was wrong. Elongated. The eyes were too large, completely black. No whites at all. It pulled itself halfway out of the grave. The body was massive, at least 7 feet tall, and built like something out of a nightmare. Muscles writhed under the skin like they were alive. Morrison's mouth opened. The voice that came out was his, but layered, like multiple people speaking at once. "Please, help me." Then another voice, deeper, not human. "Release, must spread, must grow." Morrison's voice again, fighting through. "No, won't let you, won't." The thing that was Morrison began convulsing. The muscles under its skin rippled and contracted. Black veins spread across its gray flesh like a road map. It reached toward us, fingers extending impossibly long. "Kill me, please, before it." The deep voice took over. New hosts, young, strong. The thing lunged forward, but stopped, like it hit an invisible wall. It couldn't leave the grave. Morrison was still fighting, still holding it back. Can't hold much longer, every night, weaker. Sarah pulled out a syringe from her bag. I hadn't known she brought medical supplies. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Ending this," she said. She ran toward the grave. The thing that was Morrison reached for her, but instead of attacking, it exposed its neck. Morrison was still in there, still in control. Barely. "Thank you," Morrison's voice whispered. Sarah injected something into its neck. The thing convulsed, then collapsed back into the grave. The soil fell back into place, covering it like nothing had happened. Our equipment came back online at exactly 4 a.m. "What did you give it?" I asked Sarah. "Potassium chloride. Enough to stop a horse's heart. It won't hold for long, though. Whatever that thing is, it's not entirely biological. It'll regenerate." "How did you know to bring that?" Sarah looked at me with hollow eyes. "Because I've seen this before. At the hospital. We've had 3 cases in the last year. Patients who died and then weren't quite dead. The military always shows up, takes the bodies. But one of them talked before they took him. Said he was part of something called Project GRAFT. Said they were trying to create super soldiers using something they found. Something not from here. Not from here? His words, not mine. He said they found it in Afghanistan, in a cave system that wasn't on any maps, something ancient, something that shouldn't exist. They tried to weaponize it, merge it with human DNA. Morrison was one of the first test subjects. And it worked? Too well. The subjects became stronger, faster, nearly indestructible. But the thing they put inside them, it had its own agenda. It wanted to spread, to infect, to transform. The test subjects fought it, but the strain, it killed them. Except they didn't stay dead. The organism kept their bodies functional, kept trying to break free. So Morrison is a prison. His consciousness, whatever's left of it, is the only thing keeping that organism contained. Every night it tries to break free. Every night he pulls it back down. But he's losing. Each time he's a little weaker. Eventually, she didn't need to finish. I'm writing this now. October 23rd, because I need someone to know. Sarah and I went to the authorities. FBI, CDC, Department of Defense. No one would listen, or rather, they listened, and then told us to forget what we saw, threatened us with federal charges if we went public. But people need to know. There are more graves like Morrison's. Sarah found evidence of at least 12 other Project Graft subjects buried in various national cemeteries across the country. All died within weeks of each other in 2019. All listed as training accidents. All in sections of their respective cemeteries that are now restricted to the public. The one in Arlington, Morrison. His is the only grave that shows visible disturbance. Maybe because he was the first. Maybe because whatever they put in him was stronger. Or maybe he's just the strongest-willed, still fighting after 5 years. But for how much longer? I've been back to Lot 31 every night this week. Each night, the disturbance gets worse. The earth doesn't just shift anymore, it cracks, forms patterns. Like something underneath is growing, spreading its roots. Last night, Danny texted me. He quit his job. But before he left, he overheard something. The military is planning something for Halloween night. October 31st, 7 days from now. They're bringing in a team. Specialists. They're going to try to contain the situation. But here's what scares me most. I did more research on Morrison, found his family, his wife, Jennifer. She lives in Fairfax. I went to see her yesterday. Told her I was doing a documentary on fallen heroes from Operation Inherent Resolve. She told me something that made my blood run cold. Morrison had a journal. He wrote in it every day during his deployment. She gave it to me to read. Most of it was normal, talking about missing home, the heat, the food. But the last entry, dated July 13th, 2019, the day before he died. They say I volunteered, but I don't remember volunteering. I don't remember agreeing to this. The thing inside me, it whispers, tells me things, shows me things, what it wants to do to this world, what it wants to become. It says it's been waiting, buried in that cave for millennia, waiting for someone stupid enough to wake it up, to give it a body, to bring it home. If you're reading this, if something happened to me, don't let them bring me back. Burn my body, scatter the ashes. Don't let me be buried, please, because if I'm buried, if my body is intact, it won't need me anymore. It'll just need the meat, and then it'll spread. God help us, it'll spread. But they didn't burn him. They buried him in Arlington, in soil that's been consecrated, honored, filled with the remains of heroes, the perfect growing medium. Tomorrow is October 24th. 6 days until Halloween. 6 days until whatever the military is planning. And I can't shake the feeling that it's already too late. Because last night, when I visited Lot 31, the earth wasn't just disturbed. There were tracks, leading away from the grave, just a few feet, like something had crawled out, tested its limits, then returned. Morrison is losing. Part 5, The Network. But there's something else I discovered, something that makes this infinitely worse. After talking to Jennifer Morrison, I couldn't sleep. The journal entry kept replaying in my mind. So, at 2 a.m., I did what any reasonable person would do. I started making phone calls. I called every military cemetery in the country, pretended to be a genealogist researching fallen soldiers from Operation Inherent Resolve, asked specifically about any graves that required special maintenance or had ongoing issues. The responses were telling. Most cemetery administrators hung up immediately when I mentioned maintenance issues. But a few were willing to talk, off the record, in hushed voices. Quantico National Cemetery in Virginia. A grave in Section 45. Marine Corporal David Chen, Sarah's brother. She'd never mentioned it. The groundskeepers there call it the hungry grave, because it seems to consume anything they plant on it. Flowers wither in hours. Grass dies overnight, and every morning, fresh disturbance. Fort Logan National Cemetery in Colorado. Section 66, Lot 15. Army Specialist Maria Rodriguez. The caretakers have been reporting strange electromagnetic readings for months. Compasses spin wildly near her grave. Metal tools become magnetized. And the temperature. It's always 10 degrees colder there than anywhere else in the cemetery. Long Island National Cemetery in New York. Section 2A, Lot 8. Navy Petty Officer First Class Robert Kim. The soil around his grave has turned black. Not from decomposition, something else. They've tested it. The chemical composition doesn't match anything in their database, and it's spreading slowly, an inch or two each month. 12 graves, 12 cemeteries, all showing signs of disturbance. But here's the part that made my hands shake as I wrote this down. When I cross-referenced the dates of death with the lunar calendar, they all died during a new moon, the darkest night of each month. And Morrison died on July 14th, 2019, the night of a supermoon eclipse. It's not random. None of this is random. I called Sarah to tell her what I'd found. She didn't answer. Her phone went straight to voicemail, so I drove to her apartment in Georgetown. The landlord said she'd packed up and left 3 days ago, paid her lease through the end of the year, and disappeared. But she left something for me, an envelope with my name on it. Inside was a flash drive and a note. Marcus, I'm sorry I lied. David wasn't just my brother. He was my twin. We shared everything, including nightmares. For the past year, I've been dreaming his dreams, seeing through his eyes. And what I see, what's coming, I can't stop it alone. The 12 sites aren't separate incidents. They're connection points, a network. When Halloween comes, when the veil is thinnest, they're all going to activate at once. The organism isn't trying to escape, it's trying to communicate, to coordinate. Check the flash drive. And Marcus, get far away from Arlington. The specialists coming on Halloween aren't there to contain anything. They're there to facilitate it. S. I plugged in the flash drive with trembling fingers. It contained hundreds of files, medical records, military communications, video footage from 12 different cemeteries, all showing the same thing: graves that move, soil that breathes, and in every video, electromagnetic signatures that pulse in perfect synchronization like a heartbeat, like a network coming online. The final file was a recording of a phone call. Sarah's voice. and another voice I didn't recognize. Military. Official. "The test subjects are stabilizing," the unknown voice said. "Specimen 31 has successfully integrated with all 12 hosts. Phase 2 can commence on schedule." "What about the containment?" Sarah asked. "You said they were contained." A laugh, cold, mechanical. "Dr. Chen, containment was never the goal. Incubation was. We needed time for the network to mature, for the organisms to adapt to their new environment. Halloween isn't just symbolically appropriate, it's astronomically perfect. The planetary alignment will amplify the electromagnetic field by a factor of 12. The specimens will be able to communicate across vast distances, share information, coordinate their emergence. My brother, David, is he still? Your brother served his country admirably. His consciousness provided the perfect cover for Phase 1. But his usefulness has ended. On Halloween night, Specimen 31 will assume full control of all 12 hosts simultaneously. The network will be complete. The recording ended. I'm uploading this to every social media platform I can think of, sending copies to journalists, bloggers, conspiracy theorists, anyone who might listen. Because in 3 days, on Halloween night, something is going to happen. Something that's been planned for 5 years. And I'm the only one who knows. If you're reading this after October 31st, 2024, and the world hasn't ended, then maybe someone listened. Maybe someone acted. But if you're reading this and strange things are happening, if the dead aren't staying dead, if you see graves that move and soil that breathes, then I'm sorry. I tried to warn you. The network is online, and when he finally loses, when that thing breaks free, Arlington National Cemetery won't be sacred ground anymore. It'll be ground zero. I need you to share this. I know how it sounds. I know you probably think I'm crazy. But if something happens on Halloween, if you hear about an incident at Arlington, remember this story. Remember Morrison. Remember that he fought as long as he could. And remember, there are 11 more graves just like his. 11 more soldiers fighting a war that never ended. 11 more prisons that are slowly cracking. What do you think is going to happen when they all break at once? Sweet dreams. Oh, and one more thing. If you live near a national cemetery and you notice a grave that's always freshly dug, always disturbed, don't investigate. Don't ask questions, just move. Move far away. Because Morrison was the strongest of them. And even he couldn't hold it back forever. The scratching. I can still hear the scratching. But now, it's not just coming from one grave. Story number 2. There's a photograph on my desk that shouldn't exist. I'm in it, standing in front of an IRS building in downtown Milwaukee that was demolished in 1987. The problem is, I took this job in 2019. And the real problem? The timestamp on the photo says Monday, October 14th, 2024. Last week. If you're still listening after that, good, you need to hear this. Because somewhere out there, maybe in your town, maybe on your street, there's an office that only appears on Mondays. And if you get a letter from them, whatever you do, don't go alone. But wait, I need you to understand something first. Comment below if you've ever received an IRS notice that didn't quite look right. The paper too thick, the seal slightly off, the signature that seemed to shimmer when you moved it under the light. Because if you have, then you already know them. You just don't remember yet. All right, the story starts now. My name is David Chen, and I've been a certified public accountant in Milwaukee for 12 years. I mention this because I want you to understand. I know what real IRS correspondence looks like. I've seen thousands of letters, notices, audits. I know the weight of the paper, the exact shade of the letterhead, the way the seal feels under your thumb. So, when Mrs. Eleanor Fitzgerald walked into my office that Tuesday morning, October 8th, holding a letter that made my skin crawl, I knew immediately something was wrong. "David, honey," she said. And Mrs. Fitzgerald had been my client for 8 years, a sweet 73-year-old widow who ran a small flower shop on Water Street. "I got this yesterday, Monday, and I don't understand. I paid all my taxes. You filed them yourself. The envelope was wrong, too heavy, like it was made from something older than paper. The address read, IRS Regional Processing Center, 1400 North Water Street, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, 53202. I knew that address. It's where the Riverside Theater stands now, has been standing since 1988. "Mrs. Fitzgerald," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "where did you say this came from?" "The mailman delivered it yesterday." "But David, the strangest thing. He was wearing one of those old uniforms. You know, the ones from the 80s with the peaked caps. I thought maybe it was some kind of vintage day or something." I opened the letter. The moment my fingers touched it, I felt cold. Not the October in Wisconsin kind of cold, but something that seemed to pull heat from my bones. The letter was typed on an actual typewriter. I could feel the impressions of the keys pressed into the paper. It read, "Dear Mrs. Eleanor Fitzgerald, your presence is requested at the IRS Regional Processing Center regarding discrepancies in your filed returns from 1987 to 2024. Please report to 1400 North Water Street on Monday, October the 14th, 2024, at 3:33 p.m. Failure to appear will result in immediate asset seizure and retroactive penalty assessment. Sincerely, Harold Monday, Senior Tax Examiner, Monday Division." I read it 3 times. The dates were impossible. Mrs. Fitzgerald would have been living in Chicago in 1987, and she didn't move to Milwaukee until 1995. I had her complete tax history. "This is a scam," I told her, though something in my gut twisted as I said it. "Don't worry about it. I'll look into it." She left, relieved, but I kept the letter. That night, I did something I shouldn't have. I drove to 1400 North Water Street. The Riverside Theater was dark, closed for renovations. But as I sat in my car, staring at the building, I swear I saw something. For just a moment, maybe a trick of the streetlight. The theater wasn't there. In its place stood a brutal concrete building, all right angles and narrow windows, the kind they built government offices in during the 70s and 80s. And in one of those windows, 3 stories up, a light was on. A figure stood there looking down at me. Then I blinked, and it was just the theater again. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Instead, I did what accountants do best. I researched. I pulled old city records, newspaper archives, anything I could find about 1400 North Water Street. What I found made my coffee go cold in my hands. There had been an IRS building there, built in 1971, demolished in 1987 after, and this is where it gets strange, after what the Milwaukee Journal called structural inconsistencies that defied architectural explanation. The article was vague, but it mentioned that the building had been evacuated 6 months before demolition, when employees started reporting things, doors that opened to rooms that shouldn't exist, hallways that were longer walking one direction than the other, and Mondays. Something about Mondays. 7 employees had gone missing over the building's 16-year operation. All of them had disappeared on Mondays. I found their names. Harold Monday was one of them. Disappeared October 14th, 1985. My hands were shaking as I typed his name into every database I could access. Nothing. It was like he had never existed outside of that one newspaper mention. No social security number, no birth certificate, no death certificate, just gone. But then I found something else. a forum post from 2003 on a discontinued website I accessed through the Wayback Machine. Someone in Phoenix describing a letter they'd received from an IRS office that didn't exist. The tax examiner's name? Harold Monday. Another from 2009 in Portland. Harold Monday. 2015 in Detroit. Harold Monday. 2021 in Nashville. Harold Monday, always requesting meetings at 3:33 p.m. Always at addresses where IRS buildings used to stand but had been demolished years or decades before. I called Mrs. Fitzgerald that Thursday. "Eleanor, I need you to promise me something. Whatever happens, don't go to that appointment on Monday." "Oh, David." I wasn't planning to, but the strangest thing, I got another letter yesterday. My blood turned to ice. Yesterday was Wednesday. No, dear. Another letter on Monday. This past Monday. But David, Monday was 3 days ago, wasn't it? Why does it feel like Monday was yesterday? I drove to her flower shop immediately. She showed me the second letter. Same paper, same typewriter, same impossible feel. But this one was different. Second notice. Your appointment has been rescheduled to Monday, October 14th, 2024, at 3:33 p.m. Mr. David Chen may accompany you as your registered representative. Failure to appear will result in retroactive existence audit. Retroactive existence audit. What the hell did that mean? "Mrs. Fitzgerald," I said slowly, "what do you remember about Monday?" She frowned, her usually sharp eyes clouding. I opened the shop, I think. Did I open the shop Monday? David, why can't I remember Monday? I couldn't either. The more I tried to think about it, the more it slipped away like smoke. I knew Monday had happened. It had to have happened, but it was just missing. That's when I noticed the calendar on her wall. October 2024. Every Monday was blank, not unmarked, blank. Like someone had cut perfect rectangles out of the paper where the Mondays should be. I made a decision that night. Maybe it was stupid, maybe it was brave, maybe it was both. I was going to that appointment with Mrs. Fitzgerald. I spent the weekend preparing. I don't know what I was preparing for exactly. I photocopied all of her tax returns, created backup files, even wrote a letter to my partner at the firm explaining everything, just in case. I set it to auto-send Tuesday morning if I didn't cancel it. Sunday night, I didn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table watching the clock. 11:57, 11:58, 11:59, 12 o'clock. Monday. The world shifted. It's hard to explain. Have you ever been in a room where someone turns off a white noise machine you didn't know was running? That sudden awareness of a silence that was always there? It was like that, but with everything. The air felt thinner. Colors seemed not quite right. And every digital clock in my house showed a time that didn't match the analog ones. I picked up Mrs. Fitzgerald at 3 p.m. She was confused, kept asking why we were going somewhere on a Sunday. Even though she knew it was Monday. We both knew it was Monday. But Monday felt wrong in our mouths, like a word from a language we didn't quite speak. The drive to 1400 North Water Street took exactly 33 minutes. I know because I watched the clock the entire time. Except the clock moved strangely. Sometimes a minute lasted forever. Sometimes 5 minutes passed in a blink. When we arrived, the theater wasn't there. The IRS building stood in its place, exactly as it had looked in the old photographs I'd found. Brutalist concrete, narrow windows, a revolving door that turned slowly, endlessly, even though no one was pushing it. "David," Mrs. Fitzgerald whispered, "do you see it too?" I nodded. We sat in the car for a moment, both of us knowing that once we went in, something would change. The parking meter outside read, "Monday, parking only, 33 minutes maximum." I fed it 2 quarters. The coins disappeared into the slot without a sound. The revolving door pulled us in. I don't mean we walked into it. I mean it pulled us, like gravity had shifted, like the building needed us inside. The lobby was exactly what you'd expect from a government building circa 1975. Wood paneling, orange carpet, fluorescent lights that hummed at a frequency that made my teeth ache. But it was empty. Completely, utterly empty. Except for the directory on the wall. Hundreds of names, all different, but somehow all the same. Harold Monday, tax examiner, room 333. Harrison Monday, audit specialist, room 333. Helena Monday, revenue officer, room 333. All Monday. All in room 333. The elevator was waiting for us, doors open. We didn't have a choice. You understand that, right? Once you're in the Monday building, you don't have choices anymore. You just have appointments. The elevator had buttons for floors that shouldn't exist. Not just a 13th floor, but a floor 0, a floor -1, a floor marked only with a symbol that hurt to look at. I pressed 3. The elevator moved sideways first, I'm sure of it, before going up. The 3rd floor hallway stretched in both directions, seemingly forever. Every door was numbered 333. Which one? Mrs. Fitzgerald asked. Before I could answer, one door opened. Not all the way, just a crack, just enough to see the darkness beyond. And from that darkness, a voice, Mrs. Fitzgerald, Mr. Chen. Right on time. The office was impossible. I've been in hundreds of offices. This wasn't one of them. This was the idea of an office. Like someone had described the concept to something that had never seen one, and it had tried its best to recreate it. The desk was too large, extending back into shadows that shouldn't exist in a room with fluorescent lighting. The chair behind it was empty, but somehow Harold Monday was there. I can't explain it better than that. The chair was empty, and Harold Monday was sitting in it. He looked exactly like a tax examiner from 1985. Polyester suit, thin tie, hair that was somehow both perfectly styled and completely wrong. But his face kept slipping, like your eyes couldn't quite hold on to it. One moment he looked 30, the next 70, the next older than anyone should be. "Please sit," he said, and chairs appeared, not were there, appeared. "We have much to discuss about your returns." He opened a file that was simultaneously too thin and too thick, pages that were both blank and covered in numbers that writhed like insects. "Mrs. Fitzgerald," he said, his voice coming from everywhere and nowhere. "You failed to file returns for the years 1987 through 1994. "I lived in Chicago then," she said, her voice small. "No," Harold Monday replied, and suddenly I wasn't sure she had. "You lived here. You've always lived here. You just don't remember the Mondays." He turned to me, and for a moment, just a moment, I saw what he really was, or wasn't. The absence of him, the void where a person should be, filled with nothing but Mondays. Endless, eternal Mondays, stolen from everyone who'd ever forgotten them. "Mr. Chen," he said, "you've been very helpful, but you've also been very curious. Curiosity is taxable." The room started to stretch. The walls pulled away from us, or we shrank, I couldn't tell. The filing cabinets that lined the walls grew taller, impossibly tall, reaching up into darkness. And from each drawer, whispers. Voices of everyone who'd ever lost a Monday. "Here's what's going to happen," Harold Monday continued, shuffling papers that aged decades between each movement. "Mrs. Fitzgerald owes us 7 years of Mondays. That's 364 Mondays, plus interest and penalties. Let's call it 400 Mondays even." That's impossible," I managed to say. "Is it?" He tilted his head, and for a second it kept tilting, all the way around before snapping back. How many Mondays do you remember from last year, mister? Chen, really remember? Not just know happened, but actually remember? I tried to think. Tried to recall specific Mondays. They were there. They had to be there, but they were gray, empty, like photocopies of photocopies. Everyone owes Monday taxes, he explained, his grin too wide, with too many teeth that were too square. Most people pay them without knowing. A forgotten Monday here, a blurred Monday there, but some people don't pay their fair share, and that's where I come in. Mrs. Fitzgerald was crying silently beside me. Please, she whispered. I don't have 400 Mondays left. No, Harold Monday agreed. You don't. Which is why we'll have to take them retroactively. Every Monday you've ever lived, backwards from now. You'll wake up Tuesday not knowing why you're 7 days older. Then the next Tuesday, 14 days older. Until all your Mondays are collected. Wait, I said, standing up. The chair disappeared the moment I left it. Take mine instead. Harold Monday laughed. It sounded like calendar pages tearing. Yours? Mr. Chen, you're already paying. Why do you think you're here? You've been paying since you touched that letter. Check your phone. I pulled out my phone. October 21st, 2024. Tuesday. But we just got here. It's Monday the 14th. Was it? Harold Monday asked. Or was that last Monday? Or the Monday before? How many Mondays have you spent in this office, mister? Chen, how many times have we had this conversation? The room spun. I grabbed the desk to steady myself and my hand passed through it. Not like it was intangible, like I was. The good news, Harold Monday continued, is that Mrs. Fitzgerald's debt is paid. 400 Mondays collected from her account. She won't remember them, of course. Won't remember you bringing her here every Monday for... how long has it been? I looked at Mrs. Fitzgerald. She was older, not drastically but noticeably. Lines that weren't there before, a stoop to her shoulders, her hair more gray than silver. What did you do? I demanded. Nothing she won't forget by Tuesday. That's the beauty of Monday collections. No one ever remembers. Except... He leaned forward, and the empty chair creaked under the weight of his non-existence. Except, sometimes they do. In dreams, in moments of déjà vu, in that creeping feeling that time is wrong, that days are missing, that something happened on a Monday that changed everything, but you just can't remember. The office started to fade, or we did. The walls became transparent, showing other offices behind them, beside them, inside them. All room 333. All containing Harold Monday and confused people trying to understand where their time had gone. Time to go, Harold Monday said. Tuesday is calling. But don't worry, you'll be back. Everyone comes back to Monday eventually, even if they don't remember. The last thing I saw was the calendar on his wall. Every date was Monday the 14th. Every month, every year, all Monday the 14th, stretching back to 1985 and forward to forever. Then we were in my car, parked outside the Riverside Theater. It was dark. My phone said October 22nd, 2024. Tuesday, 3:33 a.m. Mrs. Fitzgerald was asleep in the passenger seat. When I woke her, she didn't remember why we were there. Didn't remember the office, Harold Monday, any of it. Just complained about losing a week somehow and asked if I could drive her home. But I remembered. I remember everything, and that photograph I mentioned at the beginning? I found it on my desk that Tuesday morning. Me, standing in front of the IRS building that doesn't exist, next to Harold Monday who isn't there. But in the reflection in the glass doors behind us, hundreds of me, all standing there on different Mondays, all taking the same picture, all forgetting until the next time. I'm telling you this because it's Sunday night as I write this. Tomorrow is Monday, October 28th, 2024, and I found another letter in my mailbox today. Not for a client this time, for me. Dear Mr. David Chen, your presence is requested at the IRS Regional Processing Center regarding your curiosity tax assessment. Please report to 1400 North Water Street on Monday, October 28th, 2024 at 3:33 p.m. You know what happens if you don't come. Sincerely, Harold Monday, Senior Tax Examiner, Monday Division, P.S. Bring the photograph. The thing is, I know I'll go. I've probably gone before. How many Mondays have I lost already? How many times have I written this story, trying to warn people, only to forget by Tuesday? But here's what I discovered in the days after that first visit. What I found that terrifies me more than Harold Monday himself. I started tracking everyone who'd received those letters. Not just the forum posts from years past, but current cases. Real people, living in cities across America, all getting summons to IRS offices that don't exist, all scheduled for Mondays at 3:33 p.m., and they all forget, every single one of them. By Tuesday morning, they've lost not just the Monday they spent in room 333, but pieces of other Mondays too, sometimes decades worth, time just carved out of their lives, leaving them confused, aged, wondering why they feel like they've lost something important but can never remember what. I found Sarah Martinez in Phoenix. She received her letter in March 2024. Before her visit to Harold Monday, she was a marathon runner, 32 years old, training for the Boston Marathon. After, she's 35. Her body somehow 3 years older, her muscles mysteriously untrained. She has no memory of running in years, though her apartment is filled with medals and certificates she doesn't remember earning. I keep having dreams about running, she told me over the phone, her voice distant. But they feel like someone else's dreams. Like I'm watching someone who looks like me but isn't me. Does that make sense? It makes perfect sense. Because those weren't her dreams. They were her Mondays. All the Monday morning runs, the Monday training sessions, the Monday races, gone. Fed to Harold Monday's endless hunger for time that people don't properly remember. Then there's Marcus Webb in Detroit, 45 years old when he got his letter in June. Owned a successful auto repair shop, married for 20 years, 2 teenage kids. After his Monday appointment, his marriage is strained, his children treat him like a stranger, and his business has somehow lost 2 decades of customer relationships. My wife keeps saying I've changed, he told me, his voice breaking. She says I don't remember our Monday date nights, the Monday morning breakfasts we shared, the Mondays we spent working on the house together, but I don't remember forgetting them. It's like they never happened at all. Because they didn't. Not anymore. Harold Monday doesn't just take the time, he redistributes it. All those lost Mondays, all that stolen life, feeding something that exists between the seconds, in the gap between Sunday's end and Tuesday's beginning. I've found 17 people so far, all of them missing chunks of their lives, all of them aging in ways that don't match their memories, all of them haunted by dreams of experiences they can't quite grasp, like trying to hold water in their hands, and all of them received their letters after someone close to them became curious about Harold Monday. You see the pattern now, don't you? Mrs. Fitzgerald got her letter after I started researching. Sarah Martinez got hers after her accountant looked into a similar case. Marcus Webb received his after his brother, a tax attorney, began investigating temporal inconsistencies in IRS correspondence for a law review article. Curiosity is taxable. Research is auditable. And payment is always due on Monday. I've been mapping it, you see. Every case, every connection, every thread that leads back to room 333. And what I've found is worse than just a creature feeding on forgotten time. Harold. Monday isn't working alone. There are others. Hundreds of them. Tuesday, Thompson in accounting review. Wednesday, Williams in asset forfeiture. Thursday, Thornton in estate planning. Friday, Foster in fraud investigation. Saturday, Sutton in compliance. Sunday, Sterling in... I don't know what Sunday Sterling does. His department is listed as temporal reconciliation, and that phrase makes my teeth hurt to read. Each day of the week has its own collector, each one harvesting the time we don't properly value, the moments we waste, the hours we let slip by without really living them. But Monday is special. Monday is when people are least present, most disconnected, dragging themselves from weekend to work week without really experiencing the transition. Mondays are easy to steal because no one really wants to live them anyway. But I've learned something else, something that might be important. They're growing stronger. Check the news. Really look at it. Have you noticed how many people seem to be aging faster than they should? How many folks look older than their birthdays would suggest? How often you hear someone say they feel like they've lost time, like years have passed without them noticing. The Monday tax collectors are expanding their operations. What started as individual cases, one person here, one there, has become systematic. Entire neighborhoods now have gaps in their collective memory. Whole families aging at different rates, unable to understand why they feel disconnected from each other. And the buildings, oh God, the buildings. Every major city now has an address that doesn't quite exist. Not just demolished IRS offices, but DMV branches that were torn down, Social Security offices that burned, EPA buildings that were condemned. All of them appearing on Mondays. All of them staffed by people whose names match the day of the week. All of them collecting time from people who don't remember giving it. Milwaukee was just the beginning, the test case, the proof of concept. Now they're everywhere. And I think they're preparing for something, some kind of collection day, a massive audit of time itself, because I found one more thing in my research. One more document that shouldn't exist, filed in a database that vanishes every Tuesday morning. A form titled Temporal Collection Notice, Emergency Authorization. It's scheduled for Monday, December 30th, 2024. A Monday between 2 years, a day that hardly anyone will be paying attention to. A day when the whole world will be focused on looking backward at the year that was, or forward to the year that will be. The perfect Monday to steal. And according to the form, it's not just individuals anymore, it's collective. Community-wide, city-wide. Everyone who's ever forgotten a Monday, ever let one slip by without really living it, ever wished a Monday would just end already. They're going to collect them all at once. Every lost Monday in human history, called in on a single day. I don't know what happens when that much time gets taken at once. I don't know what's left of people who suddenly find themselves missing not just individual days, but entire swaths of their lives. I don't know what happens to a world that suddenly realizes it's been running on borrowed time for decades. But I know it's coming. And I know Harold Monday is expecting me to be there. Not just as a victim this time, but as something else. Something worse. Because the letter I received today, the one calling me back for Monday, October 28th, has a different title on it. Recruitment notice. They want to make me one of them, a collector, a Monday maybe, or a David Monday, someone to help them harvest time from the curious, the researchers, the people who ask too many questions. Someone to help them prepare for December 30th. Check your calendars, count your Mondays. Can you remember them all, really remember them, or are they just gone? Paid to a tax collector who doesn't exist, in a building that was demolished, on days you can't quite recall? If you're listening to this on a Monday, it might already be too late. The building might already have you marked. You might already owe. But if it's not Monday, if you still have time, then remember this. Never open strange IRS letters. Never visit addresses that shouldn't exist. And whatever you do, never, ever, be curious about where your Mondays go. Because Harold Monday is always collecting. Always waiting in room 333, always ready to take what you owe, whether you remember owing it or not. And the worst part? I just realized something. This story is exactly 4,747 words. I've counted 6 times, but every time I count, it comes out different. 4,747, 4,333, 4,987, 4,444. The numbers won't stay still, just like the Mondays won't stay remembered, just like Harold Monday won't stay gone. If you're still listening, check your calendar. What day is it? Are you sure? Are you really, really sure? Because I'm looking at mine right now, and every single day says Monday. Every single day. And there's someone knocking at my door at 3:33 a.m. On a Monday, that might be today, or yesterday, or tomorrow, or all of them at once. I have to go now, have to answer it, have to pay what I owe. But before I do, tell me in the comments, what day of the week did you start listening to this? And what day is it now? Because if they're different, if time slipped while you were listening, then Harold Monday knows about you too. He's probably already sent your letter. It's probably already Monday where you are. And somewhere, in a building that doesn't exist, room 333 is waiting, with your name on the door. Sweet dreams. If you can manage them on a Monday night that never ends. And if this story kept you up, if it made you check your calendar, if it made you wonder where your Mondays went, then subscribe, share it. But whatever you do, don't listen to it again on a Monday. Trust me on that. Please. Story number 3. The last voicemail my sister left me was 47 seconds long. I've listened to it exactly 112 times since that October night, and each time I hear something different in the static between her words. "Sarah," she whispered, her voice crackling through my phone at 3:14 a.m. "Whatever you do, don't come looking for me. The trees here, they remember everything." That was 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks since Emma disappeared into the forests of northwestern Connecticut, along with everyone else from Millbrook, Ashford Falls, and yes, what remained of Dudleytown itself. But I should tell you what really happened. Not the sanitized version the state police are feeding the media, not the gas leak evacuation story they're desperately trying to sell. The truth. Because maybe, just maybe, if enough people know, we can stop it from spreading again. Before you decide this is just another ghost story to help you drift off to sleep, let me ask you something. Have you checked your window lately? I mean, really checked it. Because sometimes, when the darkness between the trees gets thick enough, you can see them watching, the ones who used to live in those 3 towns. They're still there, you know. They just aren't quite themselves anymore. Now, let me tell you how it all started. My name is Sarah Chen, and until 6 weeks ago, I was a perfectly rational real estate photographer from Hartford, the kind of person who rolled her eyes at ghost stories, who thought those paranormal investigation shows were staged nonsense. Funny how quickly certainty crumbles when you're standing in an abandoned house at midnight, and you realize the footsteps upstairs aren't coming from anything human. It started with a job offer I couldn't refuse. Marcus Webb, a luxury property developer from New York, contacted me through my website. He wanted comprehensive photos of 3 small Connecticut towns he was considering for a massive revitalization project. The pay was extraordinary. $10,000 for a week's work. "There's just one thing," Marcus had said over our Zoom call, his face slightly pixelated but his unease crystal clear. "The locals can be difficult. Superstitious. You might hear stories about the area. Old folklore. Don't let it bother you." I laughed, actually laughed. "Mr. Webb, I've photographed supposedly haunted mansions from Salem to Savannah. Trust me, I don't scare easy. If only I could go back and shake that confident woman. Tell her to decline the job. Delete the email. Forget Marcus Webb's name entirely." The first town on my list was Millbrook, about an hour and 40 minutes northwest of Hartford. As I drove my Honda CR-V along Route 44 that Tuesday morning, the autumn foliage was breathtaking. Reds and golds that seemed to glow in the October sunlight. My photography instincts were already firing. This was going to make incredible portfolio material. But as I turned onto the narrow road leading to Millbrook, something shifted. The trees grew denser, their branches creating a canopy so thick that my headlights automatically clicked on. The GPS on my phone flickered, showing my location, then not showing it, then placing me somehow 3 miles away before snapping back. "Recalculating," the robotic voice said, then softer, almost like a whisper, "Turn back." I blinked. Had I really heard that? I turned the volume up, but the GPS remained silent except for normal directions. Just my imagination. Probably triggered by Marcus's warning about local superstitions. Millbrook appeared through the trees like something from a Norman Rockwell painting. If Norman Rockwell had painted exclusively in shades of gray. White clapboard houses with black shutters lined the main street. A general store with a hand-painted sign. A small church with a steeple that seemed to lean slightly as if avoiding something in the sky. But it was the silence that made my skin crawl. October in Connecticut means leaf blowers, kids playing, dogs barking. Here, nothing. Not even birds. I parked in front of the Millbrook General Store and grabbed my camera bag. The store's door was propped open, a small bell hanging motionless above it. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed over empty shelves. Not ransacked, just empty. Like someone had carefully, methodically removed every single item. "Hello?" My voice echoed off bare walls. "Anyone here?" A floorboard creaked upstairs. Then another, slow, measured steps. Like someone trying very hard not to be heard but failing. I should have left right then. Every instinct screamed at me to get back in my car and drive away. But I thought about the money, about my reputation, about not being the kind of person who gets spooked by an empty store. The footsteps stopped directly above me. Through the ceiling, I could hear breathing. Wet, labored breathing. Like someone with pneumonia trying to run a marathon. "I'm just here to take photos," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "Mr. Webb sent me." The developer, the breathing stopped. For exactly 3 seconds, I counted. Everything was perfectly still. Then the ceiling began to crack. Not all at once, but in a spreading web of lines that followed the path of those footsteps. Dust drifted down like snow. I ran, grabbed my camera bag and bolted for the door. But as I reached the threshold, a hand grabbed my shoulder. Not roughly, almost gently. I spun around to find an elderly woman standing there, though I swear the store had been empty seconds before. "You're Emma's sister," she said. It wasn't a question. Her eyes were the palest blue I'd ever seen. So pale, they were almost white. "She came through here last week, asking about Dudleytown." My heart stopped. Emma was supposed to be at a teaching conference in Boston. You saw Emma? When? What was she doing here?" The woman's grip tightened. Her fingers were ice cold through my jacket. She wanted to know about the founding families. The ones who built Dudleytown in 1747. I told her what I'm telling you now. Some ground is cursed not by what happens on it, but by what lies beneath it. The Dudley family knew. That's why they really left England. Not for religious freedom, but because they'd awakened something that followed them across the ocean. That's, I wanted to say, impossible, ridiculous, insane, but the words wouldn't come. Your sister found what she was looking for, the woman continued, and now I noticed her fingernails were caked with dirt. No, not dirt, something darker. The old Dudley Foundation stones, the ones they used to try to contain it. But she made a mistake. She took one. Just a small piece, she said, for research. The ceiling above us groaned. Long splinters began falling from the cracks. Where is she? I demanded. Where's Emma? The woman smiled, and her teeth were all wrong, too many of them, too sharp. Where they all go, eventually. Into the trees. The trees remember everything, you see. Every person who ever walked these paths, every secret, every scream. She released my shoulder and stepped back into the shadows of the store. You should leave now, Sarah Chen, before the sun sets, before they realize you're her blood. I stumbled backward out of the store, but as I turned to run to my car, I saw them. Faces in the windows of every house, pale, motionless faces, all watching me, all smiling those wrong smiles. My hands shook as I started the engine. As I drove out of Millbrook, I looked in my rearview mirror. The town had vanished, not gradually fading into the distance, but gone, like it had never existed at all, just trees, ancient, watching trees. But on my passenger seat, covered in that same dark earth, was a piece of stone. Rough, old, with symbols carved into it that hurt to look at directly, and a note in Emma's handwriting. Sarah, if you're reading this, it means they've shown you the way. Come to Dudley Town. Come before the third sunset, or we're all lost. I pulled over at a rest stop 20 miles from Millbrook, or where Millbrook should have been. My hands wouldn't stop shaking as I called Emma's phone. Straight to voicemail. I tried her school. They said she'd never shown up for the conference. Her roommate hadn't seen her in a week. The stone sat on my passenger seat like a living thing. Every time I looked away and back, it seemed to have moved slightly. The symbols carved into its surface weren't just hard to read. They actively resisted being understood. My eyes would slide off them like water off glass. I Googled Dudleytown, Connecticut curse and immediately wished I hadn't. Dudleytown, according to the articles, was Connecticut's most famous ghost town, founded in the 1740s by descendants of Edmund Dudley, who'd been beheaded by King Henry VIII for treason. The family was supposedly cursed, and everywhere they settled, madness and death followed. The town was abandoned by 1899 after a series of inexplicable tragedies. Multiple murders, mysterious disappearances, an entire family found turned to stone, though that last part was dismissed as legend. But the recent articles were what made my blood run cold. 3 weeks ago, hikers had reported strange lights in the Dudleytown forest. A week later, nearby Ashford Falls had reported multiple missing persons. Then Millbrook went silent. No phone calls out, no social media posts. The authorities claimed a chemical spill required evacuation, but no hazmat teams were ever seen. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, just coordinates. And below them, 2 words, hurry, please. The coordinates led to Ashford Falls, the second town on Marcus Webb's list. I should have driven straight to the police, should have shown them the stone, told them about Millbrook, about Emma. But I knew how that would sound. And more than that, I could feel something pulling me forward. Not physically, but deeper. Like gravity in my bones. Ashford Falls was still inhabited, technically. I drove past houses with lights on, cars and driveways, normal suburban scenes. But something was off. Everyone moved in synchronization. A man mowing his lawn turned at the exact same moment as a woman walking her dog. Children playing in a yard all looked up simultaneously, directly at my car, and smiled. I parked outside the town library, a beautiful old brick building that seemed to be the only structure not watching me. Inside, a young librarian sat at the reference desk, reading a book with no words on its pages. "I'm looking for information about Dudleytown," I said. She looked up, and her eyes were normal. Warm brown, concerned. The first normal eyes I'd seen all day. "You're Sarah, Emma's sister. She said you'd come." Relief flooded through me. "You've seen her? Is she okay? Where is she?" The librarian, her name tag said Amy, glanced around nervously. "Not here. They're listening. Always listening now." She grabbed my hand and pulled me between the shelves back to a section labeled Local History. "Your sister came here researching the Dudley curse for her PhD thesis," Amy whispered. "But she found something else. Evidence that Dudleytown wasn't abandoned. It was sealed. The remaining families didn't leave. They volunteered to stay, to keep something contained. Generation after generation, living as guardians." "Guardians of what?" Amy pulled out an old leather journal, its pages yellow with age. In 1747, Edmund Dudley's descendant, Thomas, brought more than his family to Connecticut. He brought something from the old country, something that had been sleeping under London since Roman times. The Dudleys had been its keepers for centuries, but Thomas thought the New World would be far enough away. He was wrong. She opened the journal to a map. 3 towns formed a triangle around a central point, Dudleytown. The 3 towns were built as buffers, early warning systems. If the thing in Dudleytown ever got out, these towns would change first, give the outside world time to respond. "But the Guardian families are gone now," I said, understanding beginning to dawn. "The last one died 3 weeks ago," Amy confirmed. "Old Sam Morrison, 93 years old. The moment his heart stopped, it began. Your sister was there in Dudleytown, taking photographs of the old foundations. She saw it happen. The trees began to move, not swaying, walking. And the stones, the binding stones that kept it trapped, they began to crack. What is it? What exactly are we talking about?" Amy's face went pale. "The original settlers called it the hunger between. It's not from here, not from Earth. It exists in the spaces between spaces, the dark between stars. It feeds on human consciousness, not killing, but changing, remaking, making us into something that can survive in its realm when it finally breaks through." A shadow fell across the journal. We both looked up to find 3 people standing at the end of the aisle. Their faces were human, but their movements weren't. Jerky, like marionettes being pulled by inexperienced hands. "The gathering begins at sunset," they said in unison, their voices overlapping into harmony. "All blood of the taken must attend. The threshold weakens. The hunger between grows strong." Amy gripped my arm. "Run. Get to Dudleytown before they complete the ritual. Your sister, she's the key. The Dudleys' blood made the original binding. Emma's research proved she has Dudley ancestry. Distant, but real. They need her to break the seal completely." The 3 figures stepped forward, and their faces began to shift. Features sliding like melting wax. I grabbed the journal and ran, Amy right behind me. But as we reached the library entrance, she stopped. "I can't leave," she said sadly. "I was born here. The town is in me now. But you still have a chance. Find the original foundation in Dudleytown, the cornerstone. Your sister will be there. Don't let them complete the ritual, or all 3 towns will be pulled through, and once it starts, it won't stop, town by town, city by city, until the whole world is remade." She pushed me out of the door. "Go. You have 2 hours until sunset." As I ran to my car, I saw them. Everyone in Ashford Falls had stopped what they were doing and turned to watch me. Hundreds of faces, all wearing the same patient smile. Waiting. The stone on my passenger seat was glowing now, pulsing with a light that shouldn't exist. And in my rearview mirror, as I sped toward Dudleytown, I saw the trees beginning to follow. The road to Dudleytown doesn't exist on modern maps. You won't find it on Google, and GPS systems simply show empty forest. But the stone knew the way. It grew warmer as I made correct turns, cold when I went wrong. Like the world's most terrifying game of hot and cold. The sun was already touching the tree line when I found the overgrown entrance. A rusted chain blocked the old dirt road, a no trespassing sign riddled with bullet holes hanging from its center. But the chain was already broken, cut recently. Emma's car was parked just beyond, abandoned, driver's door still open. I grabbed my phone, the journal, and, after a moment's hesitation, the stone. The moment I touched it, images flooded my mind. Not memories, older than that. Genetic echoes. London, 1542. A man in nobleman's clothes standing over a deep hole in the earth, speaking words in a language that predated human speech. The thing that answered wasn't meant for our world, but a bargain was struck. Power for the Dudley family, in exchange for keeping it fed. Just a little at first. A missing servant, a forgotten child. But appetites grow. Then Connecticut, 1747. Thomas Dudley, thinking distance would break the bond. Building Dudleytown over a natural weak point in reality, the same kind of place the thing had emerged from in London. Not escape, but a new prison. The 3 towns as anchor points, their populations unknowing guards. And now, 2024. The last guardian dead. My sister's blood, our blood, carrying just enough of the Dudley line to matter. Enough to be used as a key. I shook off the visions and started running up the old road. The trees here were wrong. Too tall, too thick, growing in patterns that hurt to perceive. Some had faces in their bark. Human faces, twisted in silent screams. Others bled a dark sap that moved against gravity, flowing upward. The ruins of Dudleytown emerged from the forest like broken teeth. Stone foundations and collapsed chimneys were all that remained of the original houses. Except for one structure in the center, a church that shouldn't still be standing. Its wooden walls were unmarked by time or weather, as if it existed in a bubble separate from the world. That's where I heard the chanting. I crept closer, peering through a gap in the wall. Inside, dozens of people stood in concentric circles around a raised platform. They were from all 3 towns. I recognized the elderly woman from Millbrook, the synchronized residents of Ashford Falls, and others I hadn't seen before. Their eyes were closed, mouths moving in perfect unison, speaking words that made my teeth ache. And in the center, on the platform, Emma. She was suspended 3 feet above the ground, arms spread wide, surrounded by a cage of light that looked like frozen lightning. Her eyes were open but solid black, reflecting something that wasn't in our world. The foundation stone beneath her was cracking, spreading outward in a spiral pattern. Marcus Webb stood beside the platform, though he looked nothing like the man from the Zoom call. His face kept shifting, young, then old, then something not quite human. He was reading from a book bound in what looked like human skin. "The bloodline returns," he intoned, his voice echoing from everywhere and nowhere. "The compact breaks. The hunger between rises to claim what was promised. 3 towns given freely. 3,000 souls prepared for transformation. The threshold opens. I had to do something. But what? I was one person against dozens, maybe hundreds. And even if I could reach Emma, I didn't know how to break whatever held her. The stone in my hand pulsed urgently. More images flooded through. Not the past this time, but instructions. The original binding ritual, performed in reverse. But it required 2 of Dudley blood, one to be the key, one to be the lock. If I entered that circle, I might be able to save Emma, but one of us would have to take her place. One of us would have to become the new guardian, holding the hunger between at bay. And guardians couldn't leave. Ever. I thought about my life in Hartford, my apartment, my career, my friends. Such small things compared to 3 towns full of people. 3,000 souls that would be pulled into something unimaginable if I did nothing. But then I heard Emma scream, not with her voice, with her mind. A psychic cry that rang through my skull. "Sarah, help me. It's showing me what it's going to do. It's going to spread. It's going to take everyone. Please." I stood up and walked into the church. Every head turned toward me simultaneously. Hundreds of black eyes reflecting that terrible not light. "Another Dudley," Marcus Webb said, and his smile split his face literally in half. "How fortuitous! The hunger between will feast tonight." I held up the stone. "I know the counter-ritual. Let her go and I'll take her place." The chanting stopped. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. Webb laughed, or made a sound that might have been laughter from something with the wrong number of throats. "You think you can bargain with us?" "With it? The compact is broken. The feast begins. Both Dudley daughters will serve." But I wasn't listening to him. I was listening to the stone, to the genetic memories of Thomas Dudley, who'd trapped this thing once before. He'd made a mistake, though. He'd tried to contain it. You can't contain something that exists between spaces. You can only redirect it. I started speaking the words the stone taught me. Not the binding ritual, something else. Something Thomas Dudley discovered too late. The thing they called the hunger between wasn't unique. There were others out there in the dark between stars. And they were competitive, territorial. I wasn't going to trap it. I was going to call something bigger. The words coming from my mouth weren't in any language meant for human tongues. Each syllable felt like swallowing broken glass in reverse. But with every word, the church began to shake. The carefully arranged circles of chanters wavered, their synchronization breaking. "Stop her," Webb commanded, his face cycling through a dozen different forms, but the townspeople couldn't move. They were locked in place, caught between 2 competing forces, the thing they'd been serving and the thing I was calling. Emma's scream pierced the air as the cage of light around her began to fluctuate. Her body convulsed, and for a moment I saw through her eyes. I saw what the hunger between really was. Imagine a vast intelligence made of pure need. Not evil, exactly, but so alien that its very existence was antithetical to human life. It didn't hate us any more than we hate the bacteria we kill with antibiotics. We were simply raw material to be reshaped into something more useful. The 3 towns would be just the beginning, a foothold in our reality from which it could spread like a virus of consciousness. But what I was calling, that was worse, and better, and exactly what we needed. The cornerstone beneath Emma exploded upward in a shower of ancient granite. From the hole beneath, darkness poured out. Not the absence of light, but something that ate light. The hunger between made manifest in our world. It looked like... no, I can't describe what it looked like. My brain kept trying to process it as different things. A mass of eyes, a geometric shape with too many dimensions, a swarm of insects made of shadow, a beautiful woman with wings of night. All of these and none of them constantly shifting. But then the church ceiling tore open, and something else looked down. If the hunger between was vast, this was infinite. If the hunger was alien, this was impossibility itself. The moment they sensed each other, both entities recoiled. The thing I'd summoned spoke, not in words, but in pure concept that branded itself into everyone's mind. "This territory is mine." The hunger between responded with a psychic shriek that shattered every window in the church. The two impossibilities circled each other in a space that existed outside our 3 dimensions, using the church as merely a stage for something larger. Webb fell to his knees, his face finally settling on one form. An ancient man, older than the country itself. "You don't know what you've done," he gasped. "The Watcher in the void. It's worse than the hunger. It doesn't reshape. It erases. Then you'd better run," I told him. The hunger between made its choice. It fled, not through space, but through the cracks between moments. But as it went, it released its hold on the 3 towns. The people collapsed like puppets with cut strings. The trees stopped bleeding. The faces in the bark closed their eyes one last time and faded. Emma fell from the platform. I caught her just before she hit the ground, her body limp but breathing. Her eyes fluttered open. Brown again. Human again. My sister again. "Sarah?" she whispered. What did you do?" Before I could answer, the Watcher in the void turned its attention to us. I felt its consciousness brush against mine, evaluating. For a heartbeat that lasted eternity, I was certain it would claim us all anyway. Make us the first meal in its new territory. But then it laughed? Or did something that felt like laughter. A cosmic joke only it understood. "The Dudley line proves interesting again," it said into our minds. "The compact transfers. This territory is protected. The price is paid in fear, not flesh. Remember, always remember." And then it was gone. Not fled like the hunger between, but simply absent, like it had never been there at all. The church began to collapse. 300 years of avoided decay catching up in seconds. I dragged Emma out as ancient timbers crashed down behind us. The other townspeople were stirring, confused, frightened, but human. Whatever hold the hunger between had on them was broken. But as we stumbled into the evening air, I realized something that made my blood run cold. The Watcher in the void hadn't left. Not really. I could feel it at the edges of perception. In the corner of my eye, in the silence between heartbeats. It had claimed the territory of the hunger between. 3 towns, 3,000 souls. We were under new management. That was 3 weeks ago. The official story is that a gas leak caused mass hallucinations in the Tri-Town area. The CDC came, ran tests, found nothing. The FBI investigated, filed reports, found nothing. Because how do you report that reality itself had been partially rewritten? Emma doesn't remember much. She knows she was researching our family history, found a connection to the Dudleys, and then blank. The last 3 weeks are just gone for her. Sometimes I catch her staring at shadows, frowning like she's trying to remember something important. But the memories don't come, and I'm grateful for that. The 3 towns are recovering. Millbrook reappeared on maps as suddenly as it had vanished. Ashford Falls residents slowly remembered how to be individuals again. And Dudleytown. Dudleytown remains ruins. But now there's a new sign at the entrance. Protected territory. Do not disturb. Marcus Webb vanished. His development company never existed. At least not in any records we can find now. The only proof he was ever real is the check he sent me. It cleared somehow. $10,000 from a bank account that shouldn't exist. But here's the thing that keeps me awake at night. The Watcher in the void is still here. Still watching. It doesn't want to remake us like the hunger between did. It feeds on something else entirely. Our awareness of it. Our fear. Every nightmare, every moment of paranoia, every time someone in the 3 towns checks their locks twice or jumps at shadows, that's its food. The new compact is simple. We remember, and it protects. We forget, and it leaves, letting the next hunger between find us. And there will be a next one. The spaces between spaces are full of hungry things, waiting for their chance. So the 3 towns remember. We tell stories. We have nightmares. We check our windows at night and sometimes see things that shouldn't be there. A face in the trees. A shadow moving against the light. Eyes in the darkness that blink in patterns that spell out words in languages we shouldn't understand. But we survive. We remain human. The price of fear is better than the price of transformation. I moved to Ashford Falls last week. Someone needs to watch. Someone with Dudley blood, even if diluted by centuries. The watcher seems to find this amusing. A Dudley returned to keep the compact, just like the old days. Sometimes I feel it hovering just behind me, a presence like the weight of deep water. But it doesn't touch, doesn't take. As long as I remember my fear, as long as the towns remember their fear, we're safe, relatively speaking. Emma calls me every day from Hartford, begging me to come home. She doesn't understand why I've suddenly moved to a tiny Connecticut town, why I've abandoned my photography career to become a small-town librarian. Amy needed a replacement. She's moving to California, as far from the 3 towns as she can get. But someone needs to keep the records. Someone needs to make sure we remember. Because here's the final truth. The one that should keep you awake tonight. The hunger between wasn't unique to our 3 towns. These weak points in reality exist everywhere. Places where the walls are thin, where the wrong word or ritual or even thought can open a door that should stay closed. Maybe there's one near you. Maybe that house in your neighborhood that never keeps residents for long. Maybe that patch of woods where the kids dare each other to spend the night. Maybe that old building downtown where the shadows fall the wrong way. The watcher in the void told me something before it settled into its new territory. It showed me a map, not of Earth, but of the weaknesses in Earth's reality. Thousands of them, tens of thousands, each one a potential doorway for something hungry. Some are guarded. Ancient families or organizations maintaining compacts with things like the Watcher, paying prices in fear or worship or sacrifice to keep worse things at bay. But others are abandoned, forgotten. Their guardians died out or moved away, leaving nothing but local legends and half-remembered warnings. Dudleytown was one of those. Until 3 weeks ago. So tonight, when you're lying in bed, listening to this story to help you fall asleep, pay attention to the sounds outside your window. The creaks in your walls. The shadows that move when nothing should be casting them. Because the truth is, we're all living in someone's territory. Something is always watching. The question is, what compact are you under? What price is being paid for your safety? And who's paying it? I know my answer. I'm a Dudley, however distant, and I've accepted my role. Every nightmare I have feeds the Watcher. Every moment of fear is a payment on humanity's debt. It's not pleasant, but it's necessary. But you, what about you? When did you last feel truly afraid? Not startled or anxious, but that deep, primal fear that tells you something is fundamentally wrong with reality. If it's been a while, maybe check your windows. Maybe look at the shadows a little more carefully. Maybe ask yourself why that one corner of your room always seems darker than it should be. Because either you're very lucky, or something else is collecting from you, and you don't even know what currency you're paying in. Sweet dreams, if you can manage them. And remember, the trees are always watching. They remember everything. The stone from Dudleytown sits on my nightstand now. Sometimes it glows. Sometimes it whispers. But mostly, it just waits. Because this isn't over. The watcher in the void is satisfied for now, but appetites change, territories shift, and somewhere out there the hunger between is looking for a new foothold. Maybe it's already found one. Maybe that's why you felt compelled to listen to this story. Maybe you're being prepared, warned, or marked. I suppose you'll find out soon enough. After all, we all live near trees, and the trees remember everything. Story number 4. The time clock still punches at 7 a.m. sharp, even though nobody else has shown up for 17 years. I know what you're thinking. Why would anyone keep going to work at a factory that's been abandoned since 2007? Well, that's the thing. It's not exactly abandoned, not to me. And once you hear what I've discovered in the bowels of the old Packard automotive plant on East Grand Boulevard, you'll understand why I can't leave. Why I won't leave. And why sometimes, late at night when I'm doing my rounds, I wonder if I even can leave anymore. Before you click away, before you tell yourself this is just another urban legend from the Rust Belt, let me ask you something. Have you ever heard machinery running in the dead of night? Not the electric hum of modern equipment, but the deep, rhythmic breathing of iron and steel that hasn't moved in decades. Have you ever felt the weight of 1,000 empty workstations watching you? Because that's my Tuesday. Hell, that's every day for me. The story begins now. My name is Frank Kowalski, and I inherited this job from my father. Not the way you think, though. See, Dad worked at Packard for 37 years before they shuttered the place. Quality Control Inspector, Building 5, second shift. When the bankruptcy hit and everyone got their pink slips, Dad just kept showing up. Mom thought he'd lost it. The neighbors whispered about dementia, but I knew better. I'd catch him some mornings sitting at the kitchen table with his thermos of black coffee and bologna sandwich, staring at nothing, and he'd say the strangest thing. "They're still making them, Frankie." Someone's got to check the work. Making what? The last car rolled off that line when I was in high school. But every morning at 6:30 a.m., Dad would grab his lunch pail, kiss Mom on the cheek, and drive to that dead factory like it was 1985. The police brought him home a few times. Trespassing, they said. But somehow, Dad always found his way back in. Through gaps in the fence, broken windows, doors that shouldn't have been unlocked but were. After a while, even the cops stopped bothering. What harm was an old man doing, wandering around a dead plant? Then came the morning Dad didn't come home. Mom called the police. They searched the plant top to bottom, or so they said. 5 million square feet of factory floor, they reminded us. Collapsed sections, flooded basements, 60-foot drops where the floors had rotted through. They found Dad's car in the employee lot. Keys still in it, but no sign of him. That was 3 years ago. 2 months after Dad vanished, I got a package. No return address, no postmark, just my name written in Dad's shaky handwriting. Inside was his employee badge, worn smooth from decades of handling, his punch card, and a note that made my blood run cold. "Your shift starts Monday, Building 5. Don't be late. I should have thrown it away. Should have called the police. Should have done anything except what I did." Which was drive to that abandoned plant at 6:45 a.m. the following Monday morning. The strangest part? The employee entrance was open. Not broken, not forced, just open. Like it was expecting me. The first thing that hit me was the smell. Not decay or mold like you'd expect from an abandoned building, but machine oil. Fresh machine oil, mixed with that distinct scent of hot metal and rubber. The smell of a working factory. The security booth sat empty, but the turnstile clicked when I badged in with Dad's ID. The electronic reader shouldn't have worked. The power had been cut years ago, but that little LED flashed green, and the gate swung open with a pneumatic hiss. "Hello?" My voice echoed off the cathedral ceiling of the main floor. Sunlight filtered through broken skylights, casting long shadows between the dormant assembly lines. Conveyor belts stretched into the darkness like the ribs of some massive, sleeping beast. Then I heard it. The time clock, K-Chunk. Building 5 was a 20-minute walk through the maze of corridors and production floors. I knew the way. Dad had brought me here for Take Your Kid to Work Day back in '92. My feet remembered the path even as my mind screamed at me to leave. The further I went, the wronger everything felt. The dust was selective, thick on some machines, completely absent on others. Footprints in some areas, but not human footprints. They were too perfect, too evenly spaced, like someone had measured each step with a ruler. Building 5's heavy steel door was closed but unlocked. The hinges screamed as I pulled it open, and that's when I saw them. The machines were running. Not all of them. Just one line. The old stamping press was coming down every 30 seconds, precise as a heartbeat. The conveyor belt crawled forward, carrying nothing, pressing nothing, inspecting nothing, but going through the motions like muscle memory. At Quality Control Station 3, Dad's station. The chair was pulled out. A thermos sat on the desk, steam rising from the open top. Fresh coffee. A bologna sandwich, one bite missing, wrapped in wax paper exactly the way Mom used to make them. The time clock on the wall showed 7 a.m. As I watched, the minute hand clicked to 7:01. Ka-Chunk, a punch card with my name on it. Frank Kowalski Jr. was already in the slot. I should have run. Every instinct, every rational thought told me to get out. But I sat down in that chair, picked up the inspection clipboard, and started my shift. Because the worst part? The part that still makes my hands shake when I think about it? There were parts coming down the line. Not car parts. Not exactly. They looked like car parts, shaped like car parts, but they were made of something that wasn't quite metal. Something that seemed to shift and breathe when you weren't looking directly at it. Something that was warm to the touch and had a pulse. That first day, I worked until 3:30 p.m., quitting time. The machine stopped the instant the clock hit the half hour. The conveyor belt ground to a halt. The stamping press froze mid-descent. Even the fluorescent lights that shouldn't have been working, flickered and went dark. I practically ran to my car, my hands fumbling with the keys. But as I sat there in the parking lot, engine running, something made me look back at the plant. Every window was dark except one. Building 5, third floor. A figure stood there, silhouetted against a pale yellow light. It raised one hand, a wave, maybe, or a warning. Then the light went out. I went home, tried to pretend it hadn't happened, tried to convince myself I'd imagined it all. But the next morning, at 6:30 a.m., I was getting dressed for work. Not because I wanted to, but because something in my chest, something that felt like duty mixed with dread, was pulling me back. This went on for weeks. Clock in at 7. Inspect the things that weren't quite parts. Mark them, pass or fail on sheets that shouldn't exist for products that couldn't be real. Clock out at 3:30. Go home. Repeat. I tried to miss a day once. Called in sick like it was a real job. The phone rang all day. When I finally answered, all I heard was the sound of the stamping press, that rhythmic ka-chunk, 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 until I promised I'd be in the next morning. After 3 months, I started noticing things. Patterns. The parts were getting better, more refined, more alive. What started as vaguely mechanical shapes were becoming intricate, organic-looking components. Like someone was designing a car not made of steel and aluminum, but of something that grew rather than was built. And I wasn't alone on the floor anymore. Other workers started appearing. Not all at once, and not exactly workers. They wore uniforms from different eras. Some had badges from the 1940s, others from the 60s, 80s. They moved through their routines with perfect precision, But their eyes, God, their eyes were empty, like looking into a doll's face. They never spoke, never looked at me, just worked their stations with mechanical efficiency. And when 3:30 came, they vanished. Not walked away. Vanished. Like someone had simply turned them off. But the night shift, that's when things got really weird. I stayed late once, had to. One of the whatever they were parts had failed inspection in a way I'd never seen before. It had rejected the failure. The red tag I'd placed on it had burned away, and the part had moved itself back to the pass line. I needed to understand what was happening. So I hid in the old supervisor's office and waited for the night shift. They came in at 11 p.m., but they didn't use the doors. They assembled themselves from the shadows between the machines, pulled themselves together from the dark corners and oil stains on the floor. They looked human from a distance, but up close they were like those parts I'd been inspecting. Not quite right, too smooth, too perfect, moving with a synchronization that made my teeth hurt to watch. And they were building something. Not cars, never cars. It was, God, how do I even describe it? Imagine if someone had never seen a vehicle before but had it described to them by something that had never seen a human. It had wheels, kind of. It had seats, sort of. It had an engine, or at least something that served the same purpose. But it was alive. The whole thing was alive. Breathing through its exhaust pipes, its headlights blinking like eyes, its body panels rippling like skin. They built 3 of them that night, and when the morning shift whistle blew, a whistle that shouldn't have been able to blow, those things drove themselves out of the factory. Not through the loading dock, through the wall, like the wall was just a suggestion. I never stayed for the night shift again, but curiosity is a dangerous thing in a place like this. After 6 months of the routine, I started exploring during my lunch breaks. The factory was massive, 13 buildings connected by tunnels and bridges, most of which had been sealed off when operations ceased. Or so I thought. The first tunnel I found was behind a false wall in Building 5's basement. The concrete looked new, despite the age of everything around it. When I pressed my ear against it, I could hear something on the other side. Not machinery, something else. Something that sounded almost like singing. It took me 3 days to work up the courage to break through that wall. I used a sledgehammer from the maintenance room, a room that shouldn't have had working tools, but did. The concrete crumbled away like it was made of chalk, revealing a corridor that stretched into absolute darkness. The singing got louder as I walked deeper. It wasn't human voices, but it wasn't exactly mechanical either. It was something in between, harmonies that rose and fell with the rhythm of the stamping press above. The sound pulled at something in my chest, made my heart try to match its tempo. The corridor led to a circular room that shouldn't have existed. According to every blueprint I'd seen of the plant, this space was supposed to be solid earth. But here it was, a vast chamber with a domed ceiling covered in pipes and wiring that pulsed with soft organic light. In the center stood a machine unlike anything I'd ever seen. It looked like a cross between an assembly line and a pipe organ, with hundreds of tubes feeding into a central hub that beat like a heart. The singing was coming from the tubes, each one producing a different tone as compressed air, or something like air, flowed through them, and connected to the machine. God, I still get sick thinking about it, were dozens of cocoons. They hung from the ceiling like fruit, each one about the size of a person. The shells were translucent, and inside each one I could see shapes. Human shapes. Workers in uniforms from different decades, all suspended in some kind of amber-colored fluid. One of the cocoons was smaller than the others. Fresher. Through its surface I could make out a familiar face. Dad. His eyes were closed, but his chest was rising and falling in perfect time with the machine's rhythm. He looked peaceful. Younger somehow. Like the years of worry and exhaustion had been drained away. That's when I noticed the newest cocoon was empty, waiting. I ran, stumbled through that dark corridor, crashed through the false wall, and didn't stop running until I reached my car. But even as I drove home, I could hear that singing in the back of my mind, and I knew with horrible certainty that the empty cocoon had my name on it. The dreams started that night. Not nightmares exactly, more like instructions. I'd see myself working the line, inspecting parts, but from above, like I was watching a film of my own life. And in the dreams, I could see the pattern. Every part I'd inspected wasn't random. They were components of something massive. Something that required decades to complete. The organic-looking pieces were growing, evolving, becoming more sophisticated with each shift. And I was helping it along. We all were. The Packard plant wasn't just manufacturing cars in its heyday. It was manufacturing workers, perfecting them. Each generation got a little more efficient, a little more dedicated, a little less human. The factory had been studying us, learning from us, preparing for something. I started paying attention to the city around me differently after that. Detroit's population had been declining for decades. People moving away, buildings abandoned, entire neighborhoods going dark. Everyone blamed the economy, the auto industry collapse, urban decay. But what if that wasn't the whole story? What if the factory was calling people home? I began noticing them on my drive to work. Cars that didn't quite look right. Too smooth, too quiet. Moving with that same mechanical precision I'd seen in the night shift workers. The families inside sat too still, smiled too consistently, and their eyes tracked me as I passed, following my movement with inhuman focus. The cars were multiplying. Every week, there were more of them on the roads. More perfect families driving perfect vehicles to perfect destinations. And every week, more missing person reports appeared in the local news. People disappearing without a trace, leaving behind cars in parking lots, keys still in ignitions. I started keeping a map, marking the locations where people had vanished. The pattern was clear once you knew how to look for it. They formed concentric circles around the Packard plant, expanding outward like ripples in a pond. The factory was harvesting the city, one person at a time. During my lunch break in the 8th month, I found the personnel office. It was on the 3rd floor of Building 2, behind a door marked Authorized Personnel Only. The lock was broken, had been for years. But the room inside was pristine. Filing cabinets lined the walls, all labeled with years. 1920 to 1930, 1930 to 1940, and so on, all the way up to 1999, 2020 to 2030. The files were incredible. Every worker who had ever set foot in the plant was documented there, but not just their employment records. There were psychological profiles, genetic analyses, family histories going back generations. The factory had been tracking bloodlines, identifying traits, breeding programs. My father's file was 3 inches thick. Inside, I found photographs dating back to the 1920s, the same man, looking exactly the same age, wearing uniforms from different eras. Frank Kowalski, Quality Control Inspector, 1923 to 1954. Frank Kowalski Jr., Quality Control Inspector, 1955 to 1987. Frank Kowalski, 3rd Quality Control Inspector, 1988 to 2007. 3 different men, 3 generations, but identical faces, identical postures, identical handwriting on their employment applications. The factory hadn't just been employing my family, it had been creating us, perfecting us, making us more suitable for the work with each iteration. At the bottom of Dad's file was a birth certificate I'd never seen before. It listed his place of birth as Packard Automotive Plant, Building 7 Medical Wing. There was a medical wing? My own file was even thicker. It contained photographs of me as a child that I didn't remember posing for, report cards from schools I'd never attended, medical records from doctors I'd never met, an entire fabricated life laid out in meticulous detail. And at the very back of the filing cabinet, in a section labeled Active Production, were files for people who didn't exist yet. Michael Chen Jr., Sarah Williams III, dozens of others, all scheduled to begin employment in the coming years, all inheriting positions from parents who had already been absorbed into the factory's deeper purposes. The factory wasn't just running a single operation. It was running generations of operations, stretching forward decades into the future. We weren't employees. We were components. Biological machinery designed to serve a purpose we couldn't comprehend. It's been 17 years now. 17 years of showing up at 7 a.m., inspecting things that shouldn't exist, and leaving at 3:30 p.m. The other workers, the day shift ones, they've started to notice me now. They nod when I pass. Sometimes they almost smile. It's getting harder to tell if they're becoming more human or if I'm becoming less. My hair's gone gray. My hands shake when I hold the inspection stamp, but I can't stop coming. I tried to retire once, even wrote up a formal letter and everything, left it on the supervisor's desk. The next morning, it was back on my kitchen table, marked Denied in red ink that looked too much like blood. The parts are different now. They're not even pretending to be car parts anymore. They're organs, mechanical organs for something much bigger than a car. I've inspected hearts with spark plugs for valves, lungs that filter exhaust instead of air, brains made of bundled wiring that pulse with thoughts I can't understand. Last week, I inspected something that looked back at me. It was supposed to be a carburetor according to the work order, but it had eyes, human eyes, brown ones with little flecks of gold, just like Dad's. It passed inspection. Yesterday, something new happened. When I clocked in, there was a note on my station. Same handwriting as the one that brought me here all those years ago. Training replacement tomorrow. Make sure they're ready. This morning, when I got to work, there was someone sitting at the station next to mine. A kid, maybe 25, looking confused and scared. He had a badge with his name, Michael Chen, and his father's employee number. "My dad used to work here," he said, his voice shaking. "He disappeared 6 months ago. I got this package. I knew. God help me. I knew exactly what package he got. I'm training him now, teaching him which stamps to use, which forms to fill out, which parts are supposed to pulse and which ones aren't. He's a quick learner. He'll be ready soon. Ready for what? I still don't know. But I think I'm about to find out. Because today, for the first time in 17 years, the supervisor's office door is open. There's a light on inside. That same pale yellow light I saw on my first day. And there's a new punch card in the time clock. Not for the floor, for the office, for management. The card has my name on it, my real name. The one I haven't used since I started here. The one that was on my birth certificate before everything became about the factory. Franklin Kowalski Jr. Plant manager. The orientation is at midnight. Mandatory attendance. Business casual. I'm sitting in my car now, in the parking lot, watching the sunset over the Detroit skyline. The factory looks different in this light. Alive, hungry. Like it's been waiting for this moment for a very long time. That thing they built on the night shift, the not-quite car that drove through the wall? I saw one on the highway last week. It was pretending to be a regular sedan, but I knew better. I could see it breathing. The family inside was smiling. But their smiles were too wide, too still. Like they were painted on. There are more of them every day. Driving our streets, parking in our driveways, running on something that isn't gasoline, powered by something that isn't combustion. And tomorrow, after my orientation, I'll know what they're really for. What we've been building all these years, what Dad knew and couldn't tell me. But here's the thing that keeps me up at night even when I'm bone-tired from the shift. That package that brought me here? I didn't tell you everything about it. There was one more thing in there besides Dad's badge and the note. A photograph, old, faded, from maybe the 1920s. It shows the Packard plant in its heyday, workers streaming in for the morning shift. In the foreground, there's a man who looks exactly like my father. Exactly. Same face, same smile, same way of standing with his weight on his left foot. The photo is dated 1923. Dad was born in 1945. I've done the math 1,000 times. It doesn't work. It can't work. But there he is, frozen in silver and gelatin, walking into the same factory that would later swallow him whole, which means when Michael Chen looks at the old employee photos in Building 5, when he finds that picture from 1987 of the quality control team, he's going to see me. Not me as I am now, graying and tired. Me as I was when I started. Young, confused, terrified. The factory doesn't just employ us, it's always employed us. We've always been here. And if you're listening to this, if you're one of the families who lost someone to the plant, check your mail. Check it carefully. Because once the factory knows your name, once it has your blood working its lines, the shift never really ends. Ka-chunk. The time clock just struck midnight. I can see the supervisor's office from here, and there's someone waiting inside. Someone who looks like my dad, but isn't. Someone who looks like me, but can't be. I'm going in now. I have to. It's not about want anymore. It's about what I am, what I've always been. If you're ever driving through Detroit, if you see the old Packard plant, keep driving. Don't slow down. Don't look too long at the windows. And whatever you do, don't listen for the sound of machines that shouldn't be running. Because once you hear them, once you really hear them, you'll never stop hearing them. And somewhere, in a dusty office nobody remembers, there's already a punch card with your name on it. Waiting. Just waiting, K-chunk. Wait, do you hear that? That rhythmic sound in the background. That's not part of the story. That's coming from outside my window. But I don't live near any factories. The nearest one was demolished 10 years ago, wasn't it? Tell me in the comments, can you hear it too? That sound, like breathing, like metal breathing. And why do I suddenly know that tomorrow morning, at 6:30 a.m., I'm going to wake up with an overwhelming need to drive to Detroit? Why do I know exactly which exit to take? Why do I already know that the door will be open?